Hey, so the purpose of this video is to basically share with people that I am autistic, and I'm making it in a video form because I feel like I have to. That's just one of my little quirks. So this is going to seem weird to whoever's watching it because the short-term purpose of the video is to share it with the people that I'm really close with, to kind of, for lack of a better term, come out to them. But I also think there's a decent chance that depending on how things go, how certain things go down the road, I may end up sharing this kind of publicly. And so I'm sort of talking to like two different audiences here. And so it's going to seem weird to either one when I'm talking to the other one. But at this point, I feel like borderline incapable of having a unstructured conversation about this with the people that I'm closest with, because I feel like it has to go, I need it to go a certain way. I am very much a perfectionist, and I feel like if I had an unstructured conversation, I'm sure it would go fine. But fine isn't good enough for me. I need it to go the way I need it to go. And I feel like making a video is the only way I can achieve that. So obviously one thing I'm doing right now is this. I just recently learned, like within the last week, I learned the term stimming, and I cannot believe that I didn't know about the term stimming before, or recognize that ever since I was a child, there was one stim in particular that I did. Like, I would be fascinated to know, like, to see home video from when I was a very young child to see if I did any more of the, like, more classic stimming that is more often associated with autism, like sort of what I'm doing here, or like flapping or that kind of thing. I've never done that. I just discovered this one, like within the last few days, and it helps with my anxiety. Like it helps. But I never felt comfortable doing any sort of obvious thing like this because I didn't want to feel different. But I couldn't not stim. And so I sort of, if I ever did a more obvious, like classic autistic stim, it must have been really early on that I learned not to do that because it made me obviously different. And what I started doing instead was picking at my fingers because it was less obvious. I can just do it down here behind my back or even in my pocket or whatever, and no one would usually see it. Like occasionally they would see my thumbs in particular, and just be horrified by what I was doing to myself. Like, I've done this my entire life. I still do this. I'm starting to try and do this kind of thing more to stop doing that because I'm self-harming. Like, I'm going to put up a picture on screen right now, and if you don't like gross stuff, like, look away because it's kind of gross. Like, this is what I used to do, or I still do, and I am trying to learn to stop. And so I'm allowing myself basically to do this kind of a thing rather than what I still do to cope, the picking. Even though it feels like I'm putting myself out there much more by allowing myself to do this kind of thing. And at first it felt like, am I choosing to do this kind of thing? And I really struggled with that thought, and like, am I just attention seeking? Am I like consciously doing this as opposed to it being like a legitimate stim or whatever? But the more I thought about it, the more I've come to realize that basically all I'm doing is allowing myself, like not stopping myself from doing it. It's not like I'm choosing to do it. It's just, rather than choosing to be masked and not do it, like I can make that choice. I've been making that choice my entire life. It's just I would do this that you wouldn't notice as much instead. By not stopping myself from doing this, hopefully I'll be able to stop self-harming. So I obviously felt the need to script this, so apologies for weird pauses when I'm referring to my outline that I wrote for this video, or this next section I actually like straight up scripted for some reason. I don't know exactly why I felt comfortable like outlining certain parts as opposed to like having a literal script to read from in other parts. But despite the fact that I imagine it will come across to most people who watch this that it's pretty obvious that I'm on the spectrum based on how I'm currently behaving, when the idea that I might be first occurred to me like a year ago or so, after doing quite a bit of research, I basically ended up deciding that I wasn't on the spectrum, because I didn't want to be the gross, privileged, entitled person in this comic. I basically thought that in trying to be empathetic toward people whose experience I related to, I was kind of being like, hey, I feel a little bit autistic too. But then I'd just be like invalidating the experience of others who have had a much harder struggle than I have. And that they have a legitimate disorder, and whatever's going on with me is something different and less serious. And maybe I'm just being like attention seeking. Like the first time it occurred to me was when I saw the video that Kyle Hill, who is like one of my content creation, science communication heroes, put out a video explaining that he was autistic. And I never would have guessed. Like, he has an impressive mask. Never would have guessed that he was autistic. And so when he came out saying that he was, some of it I couldn't quite relate to, but a lot of it I did. And so that's what first made me wonder, is it possible that I could be too? Maybe I'm a lot like Kyle. So I started looking into it. This was probably a year and a half-ish, something like that ago. And I came across the idea that, like, in trying to empathize with people, you might more or less either find or come up with the concept that, like, autism is a spectrum. And so couldn't it be argued that everyone is on the spectrum? It's just that the vast majority of people are so far to this extreme on the spectrum that they're effectively not autistic. And maybe I'm just a tiny bit further down the spectrum in this direction. But that, like, I'm not far enough on the spectrum to consider myself autistic, or if I went to try and get a diagnosis one way or the other, that I wouldn't be diagnosed as autistic. And that's pretty much where I left it. I just, like, maybe I have a couple of autistic traits, but I didn't think I actually had autism. And even if I did, it wasn't severe, and so it didn't really matter. Like, it wouldn't affect my life all that much either way. And so I kind of left it there. after looking into it for a few weeks, after seeing Kyle's video. I just decided to leave it alone. But then recently something happened that made me start looking into it again. And this time I did like a much deeper dive into it, and I've become kind of obsessed with it. And having learned a lot more about it recently, I'm realizing that it is quickly becoming one of my autistic special interests. Like, I get obsessed with things. And I can now recognize those as autistic special interests. And autism itself is becoming one of my autistic special interests. So I get obsessed with things, and I became obsessed with learning more about autism. And in doing so, like, I got closer and closer to accepting that maybe I really am. But I still hadn't accepted it, because I didn't want to be taking anything away from others that need the support more than I do. And I still legitimately believed that there was a chance that I wasn't on the spectrum, because I felt like if I were to pursue being evaluated by a diagnostician, if I chose to mask through that process, I thought I would be able to pass for neurotypical. And maybe I'm just underestimating the experts in that field, and a good clinician would be able to see through it no matter how well I was masking. But frankly, I truly believe that I am very good at masking. For example, if I choose to talk about a special interest of mine in particular, I can be much more fluent. I can choose not to stim. So let me tell you about a book idea that I have, just as an example of how well I can come across as neurotypical. I have this idea for a book where the main characters are college students that are attending university here in my hometown of Flagstaff, Arizona, but the premise of the story basically is that it's a sci-fi fantasy situation where they enroll in this program that basically allows them to go to school, more or less, with people that are effectively their grandchildren from about 60 years in the future. And that just seems like a fascinating premise for a story to me, especially through the lens of the climate crisis, because the climate crisis absolutely is one of my special interests. And I think a great lens to view it through is the fact that the people that are most affected by the climate crisis are the ones that have the least representation in us doing anything about it right now, both in terms of people that are currently alive and just like those in the global south that have contributed very, very little emissions to the atmosphere, but are going to feel the effects much more. But not only are there like the people in the global south alive today that are dealing with this problem, I see, like, not to downplay their situation at all, but an even bigger problem, in my opinion, is that future generations are going to have to deal with this, and they will have contributed nothing to this problem when they come into the world and it's already in crisis. And yet they're the ones that are going to have to deal with it much more so than those of us that caused the problem. So, how fascinating would it be if you could literally talk to your grandchildren and your grandchildren could tell you, Grandpa, what the hell? My world is in crisis. My world is much worse off than the one that you're living in because of choices that you are currently making. And maybe if I could get people to look at the climate crisis through that lens, they would choose to start making better choices. So that's the very general premise for my book. And you can see that I can choose to mask and present it relatively convincingly as if I'm a normal person. As opposed to when I choose to take the mask off and try and communicate an idea that I'm much less familiar with, haven't scripted anywhere or practiced before, sort of thing. And like I'm trying to get to this next transition, and I purposefully didn't script how to do it so that you could see what I'm like in my more natural, unmasked state where I haven't planned anything out. And I'm struggling a lot more. I'm trying to get to this video. What's the video called? Am I Autistic Enough? So there's in autism becoming a special interest of mine recently, I've been absorbing so much content about it. And one of the creators that I think does a fantastic job of communicating things very well, and who I identify with a lot. I see a lot of my own experience in the experiences that she's sharing. I believe her channel is called Mom on the Spectrum. I found this video of hers that, like, holy what? Like, I resonate with 90% of this so deeply. Granted, there are a few things I don't personally hasn't happened to me at all. But yeah, after watching the first part of this video, I would love if you would go watch that video, and hopefully what I have been able to communicate here will come across. You'll be able to see the similarities. And so, like, if you're seeing this and you don't know me personally, if I did decide to just put this out publicly ever, please go watch that video, but I obviously can't make you. For the people in my life that I am sharing this with, I am literally going to stop. Like, I'm probably sitting right next to you now. I'm going to stop the video and make you go watch that one, because I feel like that's part of how I need this to go for me to feel like it went the way I wanted it to go, need it to go. So pause, go watch that. So after, like, coming back to this question a year and a half later or whatever, doing a much deeper dive, coming across a lot of content like that I just resonate with so strongly, I was getting closer and closer to being able to accept my self-diagnosis, but I wasn't quite there. I'm just so hyper aware of what I think other people think of me all the time that, like, I basically wasn't allowing myself to accept it. I was worried that people wouldn't accept the fact that I accept it, wouldn't accept that I am autistic, sort of thing. I couldn't get all the way to accepting it because I was worried what other people would think about me claiming to be autistic and whether they would believe me, until I saw this video. So please go watch this video, or if I'm with you, again, I'm going to stop this one and make you go watch that one. So do it. So right at the end of that video, when he gets emotional, the first time I watched it, like, not only was I getting emotional, I began crying. And then I wrote this comment on it. I commented on his video saying, I've been absorbing so much content about autism in general and specifically adult diagnosed high masking people, and despite really resonating with a lot of it, I was still feeling exactly how you described yourself starting around minute 12. For example, when I saw it the other day, I was almost nervous to click on your "Isn't everyone a little bit autistic?" video because I inherently knew that the answer was no, and I was scared that I'd consider myself to be one of the people that you were diplomatically putting in their place for invalidating the autistic experience. But just a few minutes into that video, I found myself subconsciously identifying with your side of the issue rather than feeling like I was the one being lectured. Still, I had/have very serious doubts and have been struggling with whether to try and pursue a formal diagnosis, so I was very excited when I found this video, hoping that, like so many of your other videos have, maybe this one would contain something that I'd find helpful. This video has literally changed my life. I started crying at the same time you were getting emotional near the end, and I'm still crying as I write this. I resonate so strongly with everything you said that this is the first moment I've felt empowered to be able to say that accepting my self-diagnosis is going to be helpful for me. And maybe a formal diagnosis wouldn't be, and that's fine. So I don't necessarily need to go through with it if I'm scared that they would misunderstand me, and even if they didn't, a formal diagnosis probably wouldn't change much anyway. Thank you. All that to say, at this point, as I'm recording this, I have not even begun trying to pursue a formal diagnosis. I am only self-diagnosed at this moment. If I ever choose to share this publicly, it would probably be at least a few years from when I'm recording this, and there's a chance that I may have changed my mind and decided that for me, it's going to be helpful to have a formal diagnosis, but I need to start doing things for myself. I don't want to go pursue a formal diagnosis just so that I can say that I have one, to prove to other people that I am on the spectrum, because maybe they wouldn't believe me anyway, or it just doesn't matter. Like, I know I am on the spectrum, and that's all that really matters. So, since accepting my own self-diagnosis, I feel like it is, even though that was only like 2 days ago, I feel like it's already helping my mental health. Just accepting it and realizing that I have been masking and allowing myself to start unmasking and doing this kind of thing, stimming, like, the stimming might look like I'm not in a good place mentally. My mental health is struggling if I'm doing this kind of thing, but that's not how it works. Like, the stimming is a comfort, like allowing myself to do this as opposed to forcing myself to keep the mask on. Like, this makes me much more anxious than I feel comforted by doing this. And so just it's going to be a net positive, me accepting the fact that I am autistic, and it is kind of mind-blowing in retrospect that it was so hard for me to accept it, because there were so many signs. Like,
you have no idea. It's one of those things that I obsess about. I'm assuming I still have a super obsessive personality where I'm just like, Chipotle! Oh, do I still do the Chipotle jar of Chipotle foil balls? Do I do that? Okay, so like Chipotle, Frosties, Frisbee, random things I just get super pumped about.
I just attached these headphones, or not headphones, these earplugs to my wallet, because even before I revisited this idea that I might be autistic, I have been even more sensitive to loud noises than I've always been pretty sensitive to loud noises, but for some reason in the last, like, I don't know, 6 months, it seems to have like ramped up a little bit. And so my wife encouraged me to try these things, and I have found them so helpful that I decided that I needed to attach them to my wallet. It's a pretty clear sign. Like, that is a pretty damn clear sign. I don't know why it was so hard for me to accept it. And already, just within a couple of days of accepting it, I'm starting to, just looking at my life through that lens, it explains so many things that have happened to me throughout my life. It allows me to, like, that comic, for example. The first time I saw that comic, it shut me down. It made me think I wasn't autistic. I thought I was being that gross, privileged person. But now that I realize that I am autistic, like, I'm offended by that comic. Like, I have been masking my whole life well enough that the vast majority of people have never at least vocalized their suspicion that I might be autistic. And so, like, suggesting that it's even possible for someone to do that, and that they're being assholes for trying, like, no, that's my life. That comic upsets me now. Accepting the fact that I'm autistic and looking through things through that lens and allowing myself to start unmasking, I feel like it's already improving my mental health. And yeah. So that's where I'm basically going to leave things for when I'm sharing this with people in my personal life. And if this is being shared publicly, the reason I would have done that is because I found Kyle Hill and Mom on the Spectrum and these other places, so many other things that I've resonated with. It's helped me. And so, on the off chance that sharing my experience might be helpful to someone else the way them sharing theirs was helpful to me, that's why I'd be doing it. So, if you resonate with any of this, I believe you. Try to be accepting, because I can already tell it's going to be a net positive for me, and I hope it will be for you as well. Thanks.